Hello and welcome to episode 208 of the Rush Roundtable, where we discuss the opening track and the title track for 1996's Test for Echo album. Obviously, the song Test for Echo. I already said that, title track. So in this case, for the panel tonight, we got Paul here, got Tal, and we are joined by Mario. So just a small, tight group of four of us. At this point, the intro to this song, only 4 measures. They get right into it. Yeah, we're not talking Metallica where we have like a 32 measure intro. We're talking 4 measures, boom, hit the chorus. And basically, let's see, what does he say in the chorus? Here we go, vertigo, video vertigo, test for echo. Here we go in slow-mo, video vertigo, test for echo, test for echo. And then they kick into an 8 measure interlude before we hit the verse. What are we thinking about the chorus and the intro to the song?
He got right into it when he said the title track.
Yeah, it's a strong start. I mean, it's the longest they've gone. That's the longest break they'd had between albums since they all got together in the first place. And you can kind of tell it's like they're itching to go because they all came off the break. You had Getty raising his kid, and you had Neil, who I know we're going to hear about, as far as completely changing his style, taking lessons and changing things up. And you had Alex coming off Victor. So that entire project being under his control, he's coming in strong. So with an album that's got a theme of communication and connectivity, you've got a really strong start.
Yeah, definitely is kind of an eerie, sort of mysterious, kind of lurky way to start an album. But like, I think it's cool. Like, it kind of hooks me in, and without a crazy instrumental beginning to start us off, like right away with the vocals, it's like this. You kind of get hooked onto the story kind of quickly, which I kind of like sort of herald their sort of comeback after 3 years of absence, or 2 years of absence if you count the tour. So yeah, it's a great start.
Just a little preview about the jazz influences from Neil. Instantly, the minute you start hearing the way he's tapping on the cymbals and the drums, you could just tell that the jazz influence is really starting to come alive here.
Certainly for the guitar, Lifeson, as I said right before we began recording, of course, Lifeson was detuned a whole step. So they're bringing in, so Neil, as Mario just said, he got that he's been studying with a jazz man, but then, hey, let's detune the instruments down. So we got this 90s heaviness happening too. Because, I mean, I have a weird perception of the 90s. So there's some part of me that just says, oh, this is 97. No, this is 96. Well, it's at the end of the 90s. It's literally in the middle of the 90s. There's just some, but, I think of the 90s as far as certainly the music, the pop music became a little heavier, only to get heavy at the beginning of this century then peter out, because that's a different story that's not for tonight. But, and certainly the Victor album was a heavier album in and of itself. So, of course, the guitars are ready to just tear it apart. And that's something that I feel like they were probably building from Presto to Roll the Bones, certainly to hitting counterparts. Now we're at a heavier album as far as the guitar standpoint goes. So let's check that verse. Well, if you got something to say, let's hear that before I check the verse.
Yeah, no, I want to check in with you since you're the guitar expert. Does Test for Echo have the most songs with a drop D guitar? I believe so, right?
Well, this is completely detuned a whole step as opposed to drop D.
Like every string a whole step, right?
Yes, because the idea there was, you figure, and like we did talk about on Stick It Out there, that that was a drop D riff, which became definitely a big thing for the grunge and post grunge bands. Bands like Soundgarden drop D a whole lot. Tool, it. And Nirvana, King's X, not grunge, but obviously they were definitely a 90s band at that point. But in this case, yeah, he took it all down because he's basically playing like he's in E minor, but of course we're hearing D minor because of that. And that's something that I know Metallica did say, as I referenced Metallica yet again in the first few minutes, where I realized I didn't hit my stopwatch. The idea there is basically when Metallica recorded Death Magnetic, I think it was Rick Rubin who said, hey, why don't you guys record this song, drop down either half step or whole step. Now let's record it at pitch, So, they heard the difference between same tempo, same click track, slower feel from the lower tuning, faster, tighter, younger feel from the standard tuning of E. But everyone's got to kind of have that little bit of a change up. So yeah, this album does have a lot of standard tune, but they just came in with that low hit, and on a Les Paul no less, because they wanted to have that thickness. So it's like, all right, we're going to be detuned. Well, he's playing a Les Paul, so he's got that extra punch from the the wood and the pickups that they use. All right, now I'm going to go into the verse. So, and that was the first verse, right? Yeah, some kind of trouble on the sensory screen, camera curves over caved-in cop cars. A little bit of alliteration, Mr. Writer. Bleacher creatures, would-be desperados, clutch at plausible deniability. Short verse.
Current, very current. When you think about the last couple albums, this I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with the discussion on the other songs, but a lot of these are very topical, very modern time songs. So I think that speaks volumes as far as where they're at, and especially given the theme of the album being communication between people. Is there anybody out there? That whole idea. It's the checking. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? And they're talking about what they're seeing at that moment.
It's funny you mentioned that, because when they played the song on tour, they had like that pre-recording where the guy's like, I'm getting something, sending a signal in 5, 4, 3, 2, and then they lead right into Test for Echo. So that ties in perfectly to what Paul just said.
And given obviously the symbol of the Inukshuk, with it being the symbol of I have been here. So,
and the satellite, like technology, sort of, in a way. Technology at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like Neil here. Also on virtuality, you can say the same thing, is that he's trying to raise awareness for this ever-changing world where even with, TVs and cameras existing for a while at that point, it's like, I guess they became more prevalent in society. Like just everything, eh, every single move you make could be documented and be seen by, thousands and millions, So it's like, and even the words that test for echo, uh, also somebody said this song meanings. It's like, it's almost like when you commit a crime like this or just form any everyday actions, it's sort of a test for, oh, is it going to echo? Is it going to be like reflected and bounced, among lots of people out there, and you won't be able to maybe to keep it suppressed. So I think it's actually a really fitting title. I know it kind of flows nicely off the tongue, like very good word choice.
Agreed.
Certainly, as Paul said too, certainly really fits for today's world, if not more so than it did, 25 years ago. Moving on to the pre-chorus. So pre-chorus is actually another kind of short one. I mean, the verses were 16 measures, pre-chorus and just a short 8. Don't touch that dial. We're in denial until the showcase trial on TV. And I'm going to shift it into the chorus too. Back to the Here We Go, Vertigo, Video Vertigo, Test for Echo. So thoughts?
I think the repetition actually makes the point. We've said it how many times before, as we say the Donna doctrine, so to speak, repeating the same thing over and over again. This means something. I don't think that's obviously accidental here. They're repeating the same thing. Do you see this?
Just the simple fact that, not just with what we're doing right now, but so much that's showcase trial on TV. I mean, sensory screen. It's just it's we have the Donna doctrine, but we also have to think of Ray Kurzweil's statements on how just every 10 years just this massive jump in technology, and just to think of where we are in the world and what's going on as far as because obviously we're not here to get political or anything, but just the way the TV is playing into that world, certainly in the United States, it's no joke.
We're truly inundated. Exactly.
Yes. Well, that pre-chorus and chorus, basically for the pre-chorus, Lifeson kicks into a riff. that is kind of has that progressive rock vibe to it, of course. So they're post progressive rock. It's the 90s. Radiohead was they're about to release OK Computer at this point. So that was going to kind of come back, but they're, antedating a return of some of that progressive stuff as far as pop culture goes. Not that progressive was ever really that pop culture, but kind of in more so sense, maybe. So that, that, as I say, that worked as the pre-chorus, then into the chorus where we're getting, guitars lay back, interlude, we got another bit of a riff going, taking us now into another verse. And then actually another pre-chorus and chorus. Oh, let's go with the verse first. So some kind of pictures on the sense of, that's a weird one to just say, for even as many times as I've heard it. Some
So
kind of, wait, what's that? I'll do it. I'll do it. Some kind of,
sense. Oh,
I'm going to
yeah.
do it anyway. Some kind of pictures on the sense of clock news, Senso clock news, miles of yellow tape, silhouetted chalk lines. And you got to love tough talking hood boys in pro team logo knockoffs, conform to uniforms of some corporate entity. Yeah, that's today. If it was 1996, it's
Mm,
definitely today. I'm going to be quiet because I got to hear what you guys have to say about it.
it's definitely, corporate uniforms of some corporate entity, slaves to the system, working a 9 to 5, you're slaves to the clock, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And it just feels like you're committing a crime on yourself because you're just a slave to the, I've got to say slave to the rhythm. You're just a slave to the clock and just, you're working over and over again. You don't have time to just break from it and just try something new. I might just be going off on a tangent, but this is what I'm interpreting of it, especially when he says some corporate entity, because a lot of money involved, just everything just everything just together. They're controlling, I should say. Corporate entities are controlling over smaller entities. And this is, I would have to say, an example of that.
Well, and even in following along those lines, these would-be criminals who are saying, I'm against this, I'm against that, I'm going to rebel, but they're not rebelling because all they're doing is they're still following the lines of, for example, only capitalism. They're stealing from this to throw the money back into the system by buying this, and they're still perpetuating the system. Just my take on it.
The line that stands out to me most is the third one, of course, tough talking hood boys and pro team logo knockoffs. It makes me wonder if Neil or Pi, for that matter, had some kind of personal experience with people like this, because it seems oddly specific. Like, it's a weird. I think it's. I'm not sure if it's a metaphor of some sort, especially with the pro team logo knockoffs, but it is kind of interesting in a sense that I guess proving that they're like, you know, still what I'm looking for, like fake in some regard, like I don't know, lacking integrity. They shatter
That,
the illusion of
that's
integrity,
what I
if you
picked up
will.
on.
People at the time were probably wearing that kind of stuff because, back in the 90s, you had like that sports team starter jacket, so that's, I feel like that's what he's referencing to. Because when I think of the 90s, I think of those starter jackets. I had like the Knicks or the Cowboys or any team of that matter. And the knockoff is in, you're not officially getting it from the actual company, you're getting it off the street or something like that. And that,
Or you don't care about the
that's,
team, you're wearing it for the colors or whatever.
Right. Yeah, bandwagon fans and whatnot. Just
Right.
to
yeah,
just
yeah.
to kind of be part of the group. Well,
They want to try.
I mean, it's funny that just us sitting here with the camera kind of facing back, it's like even though this is legitimately a Taylor Guitars t-shirt, it kind of fits to that whole concept of it's a uniform that says, "Oh, I like this instrument." That inadvertently is me advertising for a company that is making a considerable amount of money from people just buying their stuff. So it's just kind of life. It winds up being, kind of, oh, this is my gang, this is my tribe, all the people we're connected to, but as if this album's about connection or something too. But and yes, the amount of Rush t-shirts that probably all of us who appear on these videos own combined. Just saying. Anyway, let's move forward. So pre-chorus, back to some riffing. Don't change that station. It's Gangster Nation. Now the crimes in syndication on TV. And I'm going to include the chorus, 15 measures. 15 measures. Here we go. What a show. Vertigo, video vertigo, test for echo. Touch and go in slow-mo, video vertigo, test for echo.
Again,
This is
the
the part of the
repetition.
chorus where you hear Getty's high voice in the background. You could hear him doing the low portion, then you could hear him doing the high portion, and that's what signifying, and I guess an important part of the song.
Yeah, always a fan of his high harmony overdubs, especially when they sample them live. And this definitely around this time they started to do that, like um because they actually didn't in like even in the early 90s. But I think when they played this only on the Test for Echo tour, of course, I believe they did include those overdubs, which does kind of
Yep.
complete the feel, I would say, for sure.
Fortunately, if you have a drummer who's got perfect time and this stays in sync with the samplers and the sequencers, it's easy to kind of keep that. Well, I shouldn't say easy, but it's easy for them to keep it together more compared to other bands.
Right. I think that is kind of the perfect segue. We talk a little bit about Neil's stylistic changes
Mm.
that were especially prevalent on Test for Echo album and tour. Yeah, so as you guys probably know, prior to the recording of Test for Echo, Neil took some lessons with a guy named Freddie Gruber. He's actually worked with many drummers back in his day, even the late great Buddy Rich. In fact, they were actually good friends. And Neil actually in an excerpt of Modern Drummer in November 1995, starting over, he talks a little bit how he wants to kind of gain an alternate perspective a little bit, not necessarily change his style, but just like too much, but get some expertise. Like he has done what he has thought has fit the songs for ages. So he figured, why don't I seek some help from somebody else? And I think part of this was one of the reasons why Tasfarado took them so long to release it. When even Getty would ask, like, when are you going to be ready to record? And Neil was like, I'm not sure, maybe a year. And Getty's like, a year. So he took some time to develop a style. And I think, you know, I've watched him drum from all his eras, and my biggest takeaway from uh, Tasfarado onwards is that he didn't necessarily lose his precision, but he seemed to learn how to loosen up a little bit more. And you can hear that not only in like his playing live, just being a little more relaxed, but also his positions, just being a little bit less intense, I find, especially on Test for Echo and a little bit of Vapor Trails. In fact, even on this song, Test for Echo, you can hear that his snare hits are not quite as powerful as they usually are. He's not raising a stick all the way to above his head. He's not. He's actually in traditional grip. So it's considerably softer, more relaxed. And I think this definitely divided some Neil fans. And I'd say there are pros and cons to this. It definitely allowed him to sort of get another side of drumming. And you can hear also on songs like Driven, he incorporates he classic kind of sort of jazzy feel into his, and I like that. But I do think I'm not sure he necessarily needed this, especially not to remain as his reputation as, one of the all-time rock drummers. And also, I find that it did get him to maybe loosen up a little bit too much at times. So we all know Rush barely used click tracks. They sometimes did, especially when they had to keep in time with a video playing in the background or like the rap on Roll the Bones or stuff like that. But usually, even when they had samples that Getty, Alex, or Neil would trigger, Neil would not listen to a click. And I find that before the Test for Echo tour, Neil was just so on point time wise, and they were so incredibly tight. And I think especially it was his peak on Hold Your Fire, Presto, and Roll the Bones tours to the point where like he was sort of his own click track. And of course, there were jokes people would make saying metronomes use Neil as a reference. But then I find that if I listen to more recent live performances, and even starting with Tess Recco, sometimes sequences he would slightly rush or drag with sequences just slightly. I feel like you would maybe only notice that if you're a drummer and actually really paying attention to his groove. And I'm not saying it was such a problem, but I do think that like that very, very intense precision and subdivisions being just perfectly even between beats was sort of going away by this time on a good amount of the songs. But sorry, I've been rambling for a long time. That's what I think. I'm not saying it was a bad choice for him to do this, but it definitely led to some noticeable changes for the rest of his career, like I must say. You guys have anything to add?
I liked this change. There's no issue there. I mean, at that point, it is the sort of thing where, they were saying in the documentaries, like they said on the I think work in progress video, that he reaches a point where he says, "I need to do more." That means he needs to do more. If he recognized he felt he needed to change, then he needed to change. And if someone's like, "Oh, I like the way you played," it's like, well, there are plenty of albums back there to listen to. He's going to do what he's going to do, and he needs it. So it's only ultimately, in some ways, only positive. I mean, it's
What,
ridiculous to say it's only
Yeah.
positive, but anyway.
No, I
when you
get
think about it, they all went through the stylistic changes because, as we've talked before, Geddy's voice went through a stylistic change when he worked with Rupert Hine, and the
Mhm.
dynamics changed.
right.
Alex, we just said, with Victor, his confidence changed. It increased, and this entire album is representative of that, as well as
Yeah.
Victor himself. When you listen to that, Neil's playing here. Neil's lyric writing, if you notice thematically, Test for Echo shows a drastic change going
Mm-hmm.
from through the 80s and into the early 90s, as we've talked over the last couple of months at the roundtables. Test for Echo shows a paradigm
Events.
shift. So
I do agree with that.
Definitely more of the current event kind of a theme, I would have to say. This is probably the first album where I really noticed that he's talking more about modern society and potentially a future or what may
Mm.
lie ahead or technology, as you will hear in other songs in the album. This is really more like a modern to the time.
Oh yeah.
yes,
If it was out now, this would feel I feel like it would obviously be a lot differently, but this is modern to the 90s.
Yeah, it was future seeking then, which the current zeitgeist, if I want to use that word here, was kind of future seeking basically. You knew we
Oh
were
yeah.
going somewhere with computers in the 90s. It was, here we are. What else is happening? And well, here we are. Hey, let's discuss the next part. So we were talking about the pre-chorus and the chorus, I do believe, which is essentially the same. I mean, the pre-chorus has changed, and that leads us into a bunch of interludes, more, sort of some longer instrumental sections, an interlude that takes us out of the chorus for 4 measures, and then a 16 measure interlude that's separate from that. Then they get into the solo, 16 measures. And then an interlude that brings in the vocals where Lifeson's got more of a 16th note groove going on some higher chords before they kind of hit the here we go, vertigo, video vertigo again. So I know I'm kind of brushing over the interludes rather quickly, and I'm not going to go too hardcore on the theory or the riffing or anything, because it's still a lot of E minor riffing, E minor pentatonic solo, and I'm not downplaying it, but it really just comes down to throw the song on, take a listen, and just be part of it. But in this case, it seems more conspicuous that here we go, vertigo, video vertigo. Those the repetition that that as Donna could be matted in and tell us that Neil is repeating that just beyond belief at this point. So a lot of instrumentals, the verses and pre-chorus are telling a story, but those choruses just keep coming back. It was at the intro of the song as a chorus. It's coming out of an interlude that takes us into the final verse. So it's like we were just saying, as far as the video of it. I mean, it became a video society, and how many people are just on the video regardless of where they are. I'm going to go to the verse unless people have something to say about the interludes and the solos and stuff. So,
Go ahead.
next verse, some kind of drama live on satellite hidden camera coverage from the crime scene to the courtroom. And I love this part, nail biting. I love it so much I can't even say it. Nail biting hood boys in borrowed ties and jackets, clutching at the straws of respectability. Once again, one of those writer's puns. He had the alliteration with caved in cop cars, and now he's talking about nail biting hood boys. I'll be quiet. Let's see what everyone else said.
In borrowed
Very
ties and jackets, how many times have we that's a trope these days. How many times have we seen that criticized or personified, whatever, use whatever word you want to use, but oh, there that person is in a suit and tie. That's whether it's a criticism or a trope, whatever you want to call it, but we expect it now. So I nailed it.
Unintended again.
sounds like on Law and Order or something, from the crime scene to the courtroom. It's just like the nature of a crime. And now at the end of the song, they're finally gonna get their verdict read. They're guilty. They're not guilty. It's the whole song is basically a progression from, I wouldn't say crime, from incident to all are innocent until proven guilty to, all right, what's the final verdict?
And it definitely has the slant of you're not expecting this person to be proven innocent from the from the slant of the song, from the cynical slant of the songwriting. I think that's the perception that it's being written in.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Cameron forgot to mention, I love how Getty goes up higher for this verse, starting up on the E. It sort of seems like he's getting his point across even more, because it seems like it is a fairly it's repetitive nature, this story, but I kind of like that to make it a little bit less boring. Choosing to sort of raise his voice a little more for this last verse. I like that a lot.
And remember, Getty called this in interviews the most Rush-like song on the entire album.
Well, as I say,
emotion, but I see that.
Well, a couple of them are very Rush-like. But for me, I just like the fact that Neil made it a point to bring in as far as nail biting hood boys, because it has the image of biting your nails because you're nervous about something, but nails are also a word, basically a euphemism for cigarettes. So in that case, if you're biting nails, you could be smoking. Are you smoking because you're laid back and just like whatever, or are you smoking because you're like, so it's like nervous or laid back because so that who knows, how's he smoking? And then nail biting because you could literally be biting your fingernails. But it's like a triple vibe there. He's going for three. He's got the trifecta in that case.
I didn't pick up on that. I like that.
Yeah. That's one reason it just kept that line just kept coming up in my head as I say so much that it's sort of, hey, what if I say it out loud and trip over myself? It's just there's just something about that. And then of course with the pre-chorus, we do kind of get that result that Mario was talking about, as far as you can't do the time, don't do the crime, that axiom, and wind up in a perp walk on TV, which at this point now we certainly have seen over the last quarter century, the number of people who would appear on TV, especially if they're celebrities, who have done the crime and they're not doing any time. If anything, some people like them better because of that. And this is what that video has gotten us. And that could be the vertigo that we might get from so much video that Neil might be talking about.
I was just gonna say.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Eerily prophetic yet again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's see what that chorus has. Chorus seems like it's the same chorus. Here we go. Vertigo, video, vertigo, test for echo. What a show. Vertigo, video, vertigo, test for echo. Here we go. In slow-mo, vertigo, video, vertigo. Sorry, test for echo. That's why I'm not lead singer. Then I don't sing well. But so yeah, and obviously those choruses, consistent, repetitious, hitting us in the face with just one little change, but telling the story with the verses. And I say pre-choruses, and I gotta admit, I say pre-choruses because my book was saying pre-choruses, and I just thought I'm gonna trust the transcriber this time because it was a pretty good transcription. I can't really credit the transcriber because I don't know which of the three names were there. So I don't know who did Test for Echo. So one of the guys, good for you. If you're watching this, awesome. So wait a minute. Did we say that the it was only played on the Test for Echo tour?
Mario?
Well, I like Temper Echo should have been played on more tours. If anything, I feel like it should have been on, the R40 because in my personal opinion, they should have played at least one song from every album. And I feel like Echo should have played because, it, it's the title track and it's a great song and it shows the different influences. So Neil could have played the way, held the sticks the way he did in that album, just to, you're going through the different stages, pun intended, different stages. And that would have been a great, excuse me, that would have been a great little tribute to their mid 90s album,
Mm.
Yeah, I totally agree.
to that period of time.
Yeah. Sorry, what's that?
I'm saying that would have been a good like reference to that period of time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It seems like this whole album, of course, last one being played on R30, and it was a different arrangement, acoustic of Resist. I mean, I would guess it's mostly due to because it would maybe bring up too many bad memories for Neil since this was a year before the tragedies. But
That's a good point.
I do think it would have been really nice to see some resuscitation of some songs on future tours. And I think the lack of live versions of Test Freckles songs sort of foreshadowed the fate of this album being a lot of fans' least favorite because they haven't seen a lot of live performances, you know? I feel like that has a kind of has a big part.
The only thing I'll throw on there is the fact that the album was fairly represented on the tour overall, number of song wise.
Yeah,
And
6 songs.
that being said, with that, we did mention at the start of the episode that they were coming from different places. And while they don't fight in the traditional sense. They didn't, they're not the kind of band that makes headlines and things like that. There is an irony because if you read some of the interviews and some of the biographies that are out there, some of the chronicles that are out there, their communication was not. There's the irony of this album's theme being connectivity and communication. I wouldn't say their communication seemed to be at its strongest point on this album. So I don't think that. I think that's one of the reasons that this album isn't as represented in things like R40 and even R30. I don't think this is necessarily one of their favorites because of that. And yeah, I understand what happened in '97 and forward, but I think that just overall in their career trajectory overall, I just I love this album. I'm definitely not here to diss Test for Echo. Matter of fact, it's in probably my upper third, to be controversial, perhaps second. But that being said, as a matter of fact, it was my one, two, three, yeah, my third tour seeing live shows with them. But that being said, I don't think because of given their very rich history, I don't think it's necessarily among their favorite period of time, not counting the big stuff, but because they were not necessarily communicating at their best at that time. It's some of their strongest individual paradigm shift changes, like we talked about, but they had yet to come together again.
Right.
So that's just something to consider, and maybe we'll get into as we go through the songs in the roundtables. But I really think that they were learning how to become themselves again before everything happened, and that's got its own place in the talks. But I think by the time the album was, it went to mastering and they put it out in the world and went on tour, I don't think they necessarily knew who they were at this point.
Then they had 6 year, no wait, 6 years to figure it out.
Exactly.
Didn't be 6 years, but they had 6 years. Who would have thought that there'd be a long gap after this album came out?
Well, it's funny because in the 70s, bands were putting out an album every year, sometimes twice a year. And then in the 80s, bands was pretty much every other year. Then, I mean, it was, I remember, like when Def Leppard had their issues after Pyromania, you have your drummer losing an arm in an auto accident. The fact that it took them like, a few years to get out Hysteria, that was the sort of thing where that just seemed like, wow, that's that they're, but that sort of in some ways almost set a tone for the 90s. You have a band like Tool who's just kind of like, when's the last album? 10 years ago? Yeah, let's give it a few more years. Peter Gabriel, one album every 20 years. Come on. So yeah, it's kind of the thing where they were living life, and life stepped in and said, hey, you guys are in bands, but you got wives and kids and blah blah, and so gave them more to work with, basically, for good and for bad, obviously, which is another discussion.
That being said, I love the live version that is out there.
Yes. Now with that, based on our timeline, we should probably wrap this up. So I definitely appreciate everyone for watching this far in. Any technical difficulties notwithstanding, because we are living in an age of reaching out and touching people and via internet, provided the internet behaves itself, or provided our wireless routers and modems behave themselves. So if you would like to join this discussion, you yourself can be sitting in a rectangle with other people sitting in rectangles, and just reach out on the page, and feel free to subscribe. Feel free to ring the bell. If I were a real YouTube basically host, I would say smash that subscribe button, but that's been said enough. You can just tap it or click it. I mean, some of us still have a mouse here, so you can click it. It's fine. Anyway, this was episode 208 discussing Test for Echo, and clearly we are into the Test for Echo album, and hopefully we'll see you for Driven, which how could we not? So thank you, and see you in the beyond.